Have you ever taken a simple job, only to find yourself in a situation that chills you to the bone? This story starts like any other, a teenager taking a gig delivering pizzas. But sometimes, it's not the pizza that's being delivered. It's you, to the unknown. I started working at 16 in my hometown, located in the suburbs of a big city. Initially, they had me assist the chef in the kitchen, clean the place, and do various other tasks. 2 months later, my boss informed me that on the days off of the main delivery boy, I would be responsible for delivering. Naturally, I agreed without hesitation. Then, out of nowhere, the delivery boy quit. He came back from delivering a pizza to a particular house, looking traumatized and shaken, like something had completely unsettled him. His face and eyes revealed a deep disturbance. He went into my boss's office, and they argued for about 15 minutes. Afterward, he came out, looked at me and said, "Good luck, kid." He then told me that he had quit. When I asked him why, he just said, "It's a shitty job, that's all." He patted me on the back and left. I suspected there was more to it than just a shitty job, but I didn't dwell on it. That was the last time I saw him. For the next couple of weeks, I took over as the delivery boy until they could find someone else. About 2 weeks into making deliveries, my boss gave me the address for a house. As usual, I put it into the GPS and headed over, watching the sunset as I drove. I hoped it would only take a couple of minutes so I could get back home quickly. Unfortunately, the house was located in the rural part of town, where the houses were about a quarter-mile apart from each other. When I arrived, I stopped in front of a 2-story house and took a good look at it. I got the creepiest feeling staring at it. The lawn was overgrown with weeds, the trees were dead, and the old porch was completely bare. No chairs, flower pots, or tables. It looked abandoned. Despite my unease, I got out of the car and knocked on the door, secretly hoping my boss had given me the wrong address so I could leave. Then, the door lock started to rattle, and the door opened. An elderly lady, at least 70 years old or so, stood before me. She had white hair, missing teeth, and was skinny and very short. But her eyes were glaring at me intensely, and it really freaked me out. I figured if I was polite, things would be okay. "Pepperoni pizza, ma'am," I said, as friendly as possible. "Yes," she replied in a hoarse voice, as if her throat was sore. "Alrighty, here you go," I said, handing the pizza over. However, she just stared at it without any emotion and didn't take it, instead reaching for her purse. Then she asked, Did you come with someone else?" she asked. I froze, quickly looking up to see her still glaring at me. The question terrified me. No," I stammered. "Where's the other one?" "He ran off on me last time he came," she said. Her words didn't make sense. I knew that the delivery guy had quit weeks ago. "He quit some weeks ago," I replied. Then she reached into her purse, as if to get some money, or so I thought. She rummaged around for about a minute, the longest minute of my life. Her hands stayed in her purse, and she eventually stopped, just staring at me. It wasn't a look of surprise or confusion, more like she was thinking deeply about something. I could see she was holding something in her right hand inside the purse, but I couldn't make out what it was. I began to panic. What if it was pepper spray, a knife, or even a gun? What could possibly take her so long to pull out $10 from her purse? Then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow behind her, a silhouette of a man approaching the door. Suddenly, I heard footsteps crunching leaves on my left, next to the porch. A deep male voice called out, "Hey." I quickly glanced over and saw a middle-aged man with an angry expression peeking over the porch. He had started climbing up towards me, and that was when I decided I'd had enough. I sprinted to my car, threw the pizza inside, started the engine, and drove off as fast as I could. I didn't look back as I sped away into the darkness. I had to lie and pay for the pizza out of my own pocket, but it was worth it to get away from that place. When I decided to quit, I told my boss what had happened that night. He was visibly shaken and asked me why I hadn't told him earlier. He mentioned that James, the previous delivery guy, had said something similar, that he just walked away from the place and didn't pay attention to the old lady. My boss then called the cops to investigate the suspicious situation and told me I could leave. About 2 days later, he called back to tell me that the house had been registered as foreclosed for over a year. And when the police broke in, they found 3 people living there, 2 men and the old lady I had encountered. They were arrested, but my boss didn't share any other details. I'm still traumatized, and I often wonder what would have happened if I had stayed a minute longer. They could have easily jumped me, but thank God I quit afterward and am still alive. I'll never forget the time I covered my friend's shift at the pizzeria. Normally, he was the delivery boy, while I was the one manning the register. That night, I made 2 normal deliveries to regular customers. Then, my manager handed me one final delivery for the night. It was 5 miles away, a much longer drive than I was used to. The GPS instructed me to turn off the highway and enter a very quiet town that I'd never heard of before. It took me down some side roads that were even more deserted than the main streets. Half of the streetlights weren't even on, and I got an uneasy feeling about the place. I just wanted to drop off the pizza and leave as quickly as possible. When I arrived at the house, it was a small, single-story building. I rang the doorbell, and almost immediately, the door swung open. An older man, maybe in his late 50s, greeted me. He had just a few gray hairs left on his head, a pale face, and a gray mustache. He gave me a smile and told me he'd be right back, then walked further into the house, disappearing from view. I stood there in the cold, waiting, feeling uncomfortable with both the area and the man who answered the door. I could hear the stomping of his footsteps on the creaky floors as he came back to the doorway, smiling. He insisted I come inside to stay warm while I waited. I told him I was fine, but he kept nudging me to come in. It was hard to justify my decision, but it was nearly 5 degrees outside, and without thinking much, I foolishly stepped inside the sketchy stranger's house. He quickly shut the door behind me and hurried off into another room. It wasn't even much warmer inside. He clearly didn't have a working heating system. I found myself inching closer and closer to the door, feeling increasingly uneasy. After a moment, the man reappeared, smiling once more. He opened a door that apparently led to the basement and looked down, saying he usually kept his money down there. He asked me to come with him to retrieve it, but I refused. Even from where I stood, I could see that the basement was pitch dark, and then it all started to unravel. I heard the unmistakable sound of a creaking step coming from the basement. Somebody else was down there. That was my breaking point. I knew it was time to leave. I turned around to open the door, but the man was already right behind me, blocking my exit. In a panic, I punched him in the face and managed to hold him off, but I could hear someone stomping up the basement steps. I had to get out of there. I shoved the man to the floor, ran outside to my car, and drove off without looking back. When I returned, I told my manager everything that had happened, and he called the cops. I never found out what came of it, but my manager gave me a few days off to recover. Since that night, I've become much wiser to the dangers of entering a stranger's home. Another late-night delivery stands out in my memory. It was probably the longest drive I'd ever done for a pizza delivery, a 20-minute drive from the pizzeria, which wasn't unheard of for the area, especially since they'd ordered 4 large pizzas. I figured it must be a party, and I'd likely get a decent tip. Navigating the dirt roads at night was always a bit unsettling, but I pushed on, hoping for the best. I finally arrived at the address, only to find a strange, old-looking building sitting in the middle of a forest clearing. No cars were parked outside, and there were no lights on. I put my car in park and called my boss to confirm the address. He read it back to me at least 3 times, and it was correct, but I could sense his annoyance. He was already in a bad mood and told me to at least go knock on the door and check it out. Normally, he'd get upset if we took back 1 pie, but bringing back 4 would have been another story, and I was afraid of how he'd react. Despite feeling unnerved, I forced myself to get out of the car and approach the front door of the building. There was no doorbell, so I knocked hard. I heard nothing, which didn't surprise me, but I felt a sinking disappointment. Not because no one answered, but because I realized this whole trip was a complete waste of time and gas. Out of desperation, I knocked 1 more time. That's when I began to hear rustling noises coming from inside the building. I knocked again and shouted that I was the pizza guy. Suddenly, everything went silent. I felt even more uneasy than before, and just as I was about to turn around to leave, I saw something at the window. Someone was looking out at me. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. All I could see were their eyes, wide open, wider than seemed humanly possible, staring directly at me. That was all I needed to see. I dropped the pizzas right there and sprinted back to my car. Of course, in that moment of panic, the car wouldn't start. I had to turn the key 3 times before the engine finally roared to life. I sped off, driving over the grass and onto the dirt road. But as I drove, I felt the car rocking and shaking in an unusual way. Something definitely wasn't right. Before I could get far from the building, I began to hear a sharp scraping noise from outside. The resistance was so strong that I couldn't even keep driving, and the car eventually came to a stop. I got out to see what was wrong, and a chill ran up my spine as I felt like my heart was skipping beats. My tires had been slashed, all 4 of them, completely flattened and off the rims. Someone had done this while I was knocking on the door of that building. Panic-stricken, I didn't try to run. Instead, I got back in the car and locked the doors, knowing that the building was so close I could almost see it through the trees. I dialed 911 and frantically explained everything to the operator. She assured me that the police would be dispatched as quickly as possible and advised me to stay hidden. I asked her whether I should stay in the car or make a run for it, and she firmly told me it would be best to stay in the car with the doors locked. She asked me to stay on the line with her until the cops arrived. My whole body was shaking, and all around me, there was nothing but dark, seemingly endless forest. I knew it would take the cops a while to get there, and sitting in that car so close to whoever slashed my tires was making me even more anxious. But the next part, that's what truly shattered me. It still shakes me to this day, and I hope nobody ever has to experience this kind of fear. While I was frantically scanning all the windows, making sure nobody was outside, I caught sight of something in my rearview mirror. The same person I had seen in the window before. Their eyes were wider than ever, staring directly at me. This time, I could clearly see it was a woman, and I could barely make out a smile starting to spread across her face. Without thinking, I flung the car door open and bolted into the woods, not caring how much noise I made. I ran until I was out of breath, which didn't take long, and then I hid behind a giant fallen log, trying to stifle my loud breathing with my hand. I waited, what felt like hours, in the pitch dark. Finally, I heard the distant sound of sirens. Mustering up all the strength and stamina I had left, I sprinted back toward the dirt road. Eventually, I saw the glowing red and blue lights of the police cars, and I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The police were parked in front of my car, scanning the area with flashlights. I ran out, yelling like a lunatic, begging for help. I collapsed to the ground, almost gagging and throwing up from the exhaustion of running so much. The officers picked me up and started questioning me, and I explained everything to the best of my ability. One of the 2 squad cars drove over to the building, and the officers conducted a search. They didn't find anyone inside, but they did come back with a few spiky objects, the same kind that had been used to slash my tires. The cops speculated that it was the work of a sick, demented couple, given that I had seen a woman, but unfortunately, they were never found. That fact still haunts me to this day. I quit my delivery job immediately after that incident and started working at a local grocery store. But I know one thing for certain. I'll never forget seeing that woman in the back of my car, eyes wide open and smiling. If you enjoyed this terrifying tale, don't forget to like, share, and comment with your thoughts. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more spine-chilling stories that will make you think twice about those dark, lonely roads and eerie encounters. You never know who or what might be watching you next.